Let me just ask you about something that I heard you say this week, which struck me. It's a place where I don't need to convince you, but I'm hoping to convince you for an upgrade of your terminology. And in discussing it, I think your values will emerge. You were discussing the question of nationalism. Do you want to say what you said earlier this week about that concept?
Yeah, I mean, I don't exactly remember what I said earlier this week versus, in the past versus today, but the thesis will be the same regardless because my beliefs haven't really changed that much. So I don't think nationalism has to be a bad word. And I think especially in the American context, it need not be a bad word because America is a country founded on a set of ideals. Unlike other nations whose identities have often been built around a common ethnicity or a language or a, religion or a monarch, we can go down the list. America's identity was founded around a set of ideals enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, codified in the Constitution. And I think that what's unique about that, the thing that distinguishes us as human beings from animals is the fact that and I'm saying this, I know I'm talking to an evolutionary biologist here, so I'm trying to speak your language, but I might get myself into trouble. I was a molecular biologist by background, so you have a higher pay grade than me on this one. But I believe one of the things that distinguishes us from animals, humans as distinctive form of animals, is that we can believe in things, that we can have conviction, that we can be persuaded of things through reason, through appeals to our emotion, through our belief in a narrative, through our ability to espouse ideals. And so if you think about America as a country founded on a set of ideals that brought together a divided, in many ways diverse group of people 250 years ago, it's a nation founded on the essence of what actually makes us distinctively human. And so the negative connotations around nationalism is typically an exclusion of the other, where the other is defined as a fellow human being. Here, to me, American nationalism is grounded in an unapologetic embrace of the ideals that thread us, that unite us across our disparate attributes, that tug on the very thing that makes us human beings in the first place and makes us want to and ought to respect one another as human beings too. And so to me, that's what American nationalism is all about, is a belief in those ideals, a belief in a nation founded on those ideals, which is a nation founded on the essence of what actually defines our humanity itself, that should cause us not to hide from it, but to embrace it, because that might be our actual best path to what you described earlier. What did you call it? The unity, the thing you worked on, Courage?
Unity 2020.
Unity 2020. That is how we get to national unity. I think is actually not by obsessing, as I believe we have in many ways we've erred in doing so, in obsessing over our differences, often even skin deep differences. We call that capital D diversity. But instead to smoke out what unites us across that diversity. And to me, that's what I mean when I call myself an American nationalist.
Interesting. Well, you have persuaded me slightly, actually, and I'll come back to why. But I want to lay out what I think is a better use of language. And my feeling, as somebody who takes language very seriously, is that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what terms we use for what thing, but there needs to be a term for everything that we need to refer to. We need to be in agreement about what the term means, and the term has to be precise enough to be useful. And so
I agree with you on that. Yep.
I've been in this discussion many times with many of my conservative friends. I'm a liberal. I would actually describe myself as a radical. I'm a reluctant radical because I think radical change is very dangerous. And the only reason that I would contemplate radical change is that we don't have a choice. But I do think that's where we are. But nonetheless, I have many conservative friends, and the term nationalism has been a bit of a sticking point because to me, there are really two concepts that, because they are similar seeming, are often conflated by people: patriotism and nationalism. Many conservatives that I speak to view them as almost the same thing, and I view them as almost opposites of each other. That patriotism is a willingness to sacrifice for something, and that something is very often a nation, but it could also be a principle or an idea. And then nationalism, I would argue, is the use of that thing in a kind of weaponized form. So, in other words, I find the two things juxtaposed in President Kennedy's famous speech, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." That what your country can do for you is the nationalist thread, and what you can do for your country is the patriotic thread. And so in general, when I hear people invoke nationalism and they are not in an aggressive mindset, I really think that they should be using the term patriotism. So what do you hear there?
Yeah. So I hear a few things. First I hear is I think I'm really going to enjoy the next couple hours of my life. So this is good. That's good. For sure. So I agree with the first thing you said, that often most problems, who was it? Maybe Wittgenstein or someone who says the most moral problems are problems of language.
Yep.
And I think I agree in a weak form of that hypothesis. That's definitely true. That many perceived problems of morality, at least, are partially problems of language. So, you and I could maybe at the outset of this conversation just align on the definition, so we're not talking past each other for the next couple of hours. I think that there's a further then distinction to be drawn between American nationalism and nationalism in the context of a country that was not actually founded on ideals. Because my version of nationalism, or American nationalism, incorporated your definition of patriotism, which is willingness to sacrifice for something where that something is an ideal.
That is exactly why I said that you had persuaded me, was because I heard in your definition of nationalism the inclusion of the values that make this potentially a much more noble weapon. Not that it's always been used that way.
So it's not even a weapon. So it's not even that you're kind to say I persuaded you. I just, maybe it made it evident that we're talking about the same thing, actually. But then there's a choice that I make, if I'm being really honest about it, right? Because I'm saying I could have said what I wanted to say. In this interview, if this is the one you're referring to, I did it with a bunch of editors at Politico when I was in Washington, D.C. That was when this came up earlier this week. I could have said patriotism or patriot. I said I could have said I'm a patriot, but I said I'm a nationalist. Why did I say that? Well, it is part of my honest definition of what it means to be an American nationalist. Is it incorporates at its core, it's not just that it includes, its very essence is a conviction around the ideals that define this country. But I use that word for two reasons. One is I want to put a fine point on this concept of American exceptionalism, which is a belief in the exceptional nature of the ideals that this country was founded on. And the fact that this country is exceptional for being a country that's founded on ideals. So I wanted to put a fine point on that. But the second point, and this is the part where I'm being a little bit honest with you on the game I'm playing here, is I feel like we're in this lull right now, right? We're in this hypnotized, aimless passage of time in our country, living our lives as though we're all a bunch of different two-legged higher mammals walk in some common geographic space that we call a country, doing what our iPhones told us to do on a given day, programmed by the algorithms that we thought we were using to program, that were programming us back in reverse, that we need to be waking up out of it a little bit. We need a little bit of shock therapy. And I think that the path to unity, I'm going to use your word here, unity runs through a little bit of discomfort. And so I think that not in a trolling kind of way, but in an honest kind of way, I want to make sure I'm actually getting there. And I think we only get there by waking us up out of this hypnotic lull that takes the status quo for granted, so much so that the status quo will no longer be the status quo, but will be some perverted form of it by the time we're done. To say that, yeah, Patriot lands either not even inside the eardrum, or if it does, it goes out the other. But nationalists, now I had their attention for the rest of that meeting. And we had a real conversation about what it actually means to be an American with a group of people that otherwise were ready to check the box and write some hit pieces on their latest Republican presidential candidate.
All right. Well, I'm also going to enjoy the next couple hours. This is fascinating, and I do appreciate what you've said about the necessity to provoke people out of their stupor so that they actually engage. And I have a whole different toolkit surrounding this, but to my
Can I ask you about one tool? So just as maybe useful, to the extent is useful. So to your point about language, just so we can put a little button on that part of the conversation, if we put this little bow on it. So then what we can do is take some words off the shelf, like dust them off like a book in an old bookcase. Make sure we do what you and I did, level set on what they actually mean, but still use some residual valence associated or attached to that word to perform the function of waking people up. And then we can still not sacrifice the precision that you care about, because you and I, by definition, just did that at the start of this conversation. But we also awakened the otherwise people we wouldn't be reaching if we were just talking about patriotism.
Yeah, this is exactly concordant with my approach. And basically, I would argue that the human mind naturally functions mostly in an unconscious way, and that consciousness is the tool that we use for novelty. When we encounter something that we cannot deal with automatic processing, our conscious mind gets involved. And we modern folks are unfortunately faced with a world in which we've got a whole bunch of totally trivial novelty that occupies our conscious minds all the time. I mean, even just the ingredient list on some food you might think to consume has a lot of puzzles in it, right? You can't process whether or not this is something you want to put in your mouth based on what the ingredient list says, because you don't know what most of those words are. So our conscious mind is sort of being spent on all of these unresolvable questions. But the correct use of the conscious mind is to point it towards puzzles that actually do require this distinctly human capability. And so what you're arguing is you could have said patriotism. Maybe that would even have been the more accurate term. But the point is, because we're so familiar with people invoking that term in a non-consequential way,